But I also grew up on the stories of the Golem and all the blood libels, but it's a very dark city. That's some different things work for different people.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, folks. Good morning. Good morning. I'm sorry that our usual level of class and style is a little bit underwhelming for today. But we have coffee. All right. So, and we'd like to welcome Lisa. So the question that this discourse addresses is, why is it that Passover, Pesach, is celebrated on the day that the miracle occurred, which is the 15th of Nisan, which of course will be tomorrow night and Tuesday. The Jewish people sat at the first Seder on the eve of the redemption, the eve of the Exodus. And at midnight, God struck the firstborn Egyptians. Pharaoh comes to Moses and says, you guys can go. And the Jews leave. According to one opinion in the Medrash, they left at the crack of dawn. But the 15th of Nisan was the day that the miracle actually occurred. Hanukkah, we celebrate Hanukkah on the day that they rested, the day after the miracle occurred. The miracle occurred, the battle essentially was won on the 24th of the month of Kislev, and they rested beginning on the 25th, which is one of the reasons that the word Chanukah itself contains the message of the miracle. Chanukah is an acronym of two words, Chanu Chafhei, which means they rested on the 25th. Another customer. Second. Ari, we're in the room on the left side. Chanu Chafhei, they rested on the 25th. Purim, it's explicit in the Megillah that they battled on the 13th and they rested on the 14th. In the walled cities in Shushan, they battled on the 14th and they rested on the 15th. And the Megillah says, and therefore we celebrate and commemorate the holiday on the day that they rested. So that's the Alter Rebbe's question. Why is it that Pesach is celebrated on the day of the miracle, whereas Hanukkah and Purim is celebrated on the day after the miracle, the day that they rested?
Well, it's the 15th, so this mercy I'm saying is the 15th. We should celebrate the miracle. That when if God was passed over, supposedly all this, the hungry Jews, or when the accidents are free that day.
Both happened on the same day. Yeah. So you want to see that Ari finds the way here? Sit, Scott. Fred's looking. You're in the middle of a question.
Pause. Commercial break.
Yeah, let's all find our. We're gonna look for the chametz tonight. Now we're looking for Ari.
Get lost too.
What do you use this for?
So this is officially what we call our C-teen lounge. The teenagers gather here, but it's also kind of a multi-purpose room. We use it for like activities for the Hebrew school, like group activities. And then Kabbalah and coffee when the other part of the building is clean for Pesach. The AA meeting will meet here tonight. We did Kiddush in here yesterday. So is he lost?
Yeah.
All right, he'll find us eventually. Anyway, yes. So the instruction was to take the Pesach lamb and to slaughter it and to place the blood over their doorposts, and then that evening to sit down to the Seder, as the Torah tells us, with their shoes on their feet, their belts girded, and their walking sticks in hand. They sat down at the Seder, and at midnight, by the way, a secret, they had matzah at that Seder, right? Even though the matzah, we know we eat because they didn't have time for the dough to rise, but they actually had matzah at that Seder. That's a conversation for another time. But so
It was all the same night as well.
same night, and at midnight is when the striking of the firstborn took place. And then Pharaoh, who was a firstborn himself, came running and said, hey, I'm next. You guys get out of here. and they left at dawn. And so this is all taking place on the 15th, right? The Jewish calendar begins.
Oh, there was something about even the Egyptians, when they started their firstborn, they went and started protesting against Pharaoh.
So that happened on the 10th of Nisan. That was what you Shabbos Hagadol, the big Shabbos, the Shabbat that precedes Pesach, is so named for that miracle. So what happened was the Torah, they were instructed to take the lamb 4 days before Passover to observe the lamb to make sure it was unblemished. So the Jews are parading through Egypt with this lamb, and the Egyptians say, what's the plan here? So they said, well, we were instructed to take the sheep because on the eve of the 15th, God's going to strike the firstborn. Now Moses had already told that to Pharaoh, but he was stubborn. When the people who are in the firstborn Egyptians heard that, they said, uh-oh, we saw that the other 9 plagues came to pass. We're in trouble. So they came to Pharaoh and said, let the Jews go. And Pharaoh said, no. So they said, okay, we're going to fight you. So they took up arms and they attacked Pharaoh's army. And there was this whole battle. Ultimately, the firstborn sons lost. But that was a miracle in and of itself, that the Egyptians themselves rose up to help the Jews. Okay, so that's the question of the discourse. Now, in classic Hasidic Alter Rebbe style, to understand this, we first are going to explore another topic, a topic of Kabbalah. And the topic of Kabbalah is the distinction between what's called Memali Kolamin and Sovev Kolamin. Memali Kolamin is the divine light that is orderly, enters into creation. And when we say creation here, we mean an expanded version of creation, not just the physical world, but the spiritual worlds as well, from the highest of the spiritual worlds. In other words, when you step outside of God's essence, you already have structure. And structure, by definition, means there's delineation. There has to take into consideration the recipient. Once you take into consideration the recipient, there has to be a program. Right? So if we're not taking into consideration the recipient, we're just throwing everything indiscriminate. So we don't care what ends up, what you get, what you don't get. But if there's an intention, then there has to be a structure. There has to be orderliness. So from the highest of spiritual levels all the way down into the physical consciousness, this is the divine light that fills all of existence. Now, what does that mean that it fills all of existence? So we expanded this a little bit to recognize that each of us have a personal relationship with God, both emotionally, spiritually, but also practically. Each of us we have a home, we have a car, we have physical life. We're made up of different characteristics, emotionally, psychologically, experientially. And that's human life, which is distinct from inanimate life, which is distinct from animal life, which is distinct from vegetable life. And every single recipient of divine energy requires that divine energy enter into them exactly as they are, as they need. Because based on, let's just use an expanded version of this, if you were to give a human being the life force of an inanimate object, it wouldn't function. Conversely, if you take the life force that a bull has and you put it into a newborn baby, we'd have a problem. There's too much energy there, right? It's a 110 and 220, 220 into 110. It becomes a little problematic. But it's deeper than that. It's not just, what is the level of vivification. It's more than that. It's also, what am I doing on this earth, right? I have a purpose here. And because of my purpose, I need to have the right amount, tailor-made energy for me to be able to fulfill my purpose. So this is all very personal. It's all very orderly. It's all very intentional. It's all very structured. That's called mimale. The word mimale means to fill. The presence of God fills all of the worlds. And we quoted a verse that Malay kol haaretz kavod, that God's glory fills all of the earth, means that everything is a recipient on a tailor-made level. Then we have sovev kolam. Sovev, the word sovev means to encompass. And by definition, encompass means that it doesn't take into consideration the individual. It's just there. God's presence is there. We have the analogy of the sun. The sun shines. The sun doesn't take into consideration who's receiving the light of the sun. Now, we can receive of the light of the sun if we use our own mechanism to capture that. But if you close your curtain, put some blackout curtains on, the sun is not a factor in your life in that moment. If you want a little bit of light, you put a light shade on it. If you want more light, you open the curtain altogether. But the sun is just shining, just is. And in terms of life force, in terms of life energy, there's a certain commonality that all of existence has. Whether you're an animal or a stone or a person or an oak tree, you're either alive or you're not alive. You're either here or you're not here. You either exist or you don't exist. I gave the example at the end of our class last time, the idea of you can have somebody sitting on their deathbed and a newborn child or somebody in their 20s who's full of energy, and there's a distinction on the level of memali kalam, and on the level that fills the divine light that fills, there's clearly a distinction. The person who's on their deathbed in a coma doesn't have that much life energy, but they are alive just as much as the newborn child is alive. There's a certain commonality there. That's the divine energy that gives all of existence its energy. Now, the reason why it goes hand in hand, because it's an encompassing energy, it's too powerful to be internalized. It's not structured to be internalized. So on the one hand, it is a greater energy. Its downside is that we don't internalize it. The internalized energy, by definition, is a lower energy. It's a lower divine manifestation. That's why we can contain it. That's its downside, is that it's a lower energy. The upside is that we're in a real relationship with it. We're connected to it. So each one has an advantage and a disadvantage. Got it? Any questions?
How did the author of this course know it's either through transmission, the Soviet style, or the Soviet, or it's through?
Why Soviet?
Because it's Soviet.
Oh, Soviet.
Soviet.
I thought you said Soviet. I'm wondering, what do the Russians have to do with this?
That's what I thought.
Soviet. Okay, Soviet. Yeah.
It's through kinetic, I don't know, transmission versus, it fills each level. So how does the author know this on a Kabbalistic level?
So first of all, the Alter Rebbe sources this from the Zohar. That's okay. That's okay. So this is a question you like to ask a lot.
I ask this all the time because I like to go right to the end of it.
So first of all, this is all sourced in the Zohar. Ultimately, all Kabbalah is sourced in the Zohar from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And I also answered this question in the past. You can ask it 100 times, it's okay. But I just want to give you the core of it. What we see is what meets our senses, right? When you look at that cup of coffee, you see a cup and you see coffee. As you're studying, you're beginning to see there's more than coffee here. There's a divine energy, right? You could see that with your brain, but it's still intellectual. You may even connect with it emotionally and feel gratitude that God is giving you life, right? But we're still operating within a certain dimension. A tzaddik, Kabbalist, a Rebbe, has a different set of eyes. They see things differently. So there's an interesting, I don't remember the source for this, but there's an interesting passage that says that there's a debate whether the Torah speaks of the physical and alludes to the spiritual, or the Torah speaks of the spiritual and alludes to the physical. In other words, when you read the Torah, what are you reading? Are you reading a physical story that tells you, oh, by the way, in heaven, there's a mirror of this? Or are you really reading a spiritual story that you're looking at the physical mirror of it? In other words, we're on the bottom of it. A Rebbe, a tzaddik, sees it as it really is. They experience both of these divine energies. So it's as familiar to them as your cup of coffee is to you. So they know it. They're just sharing with us what they experience. But in terms of Kabbalistic sources, all of the Rebbes always sourced their teachings.
I remember I asked you this regarding the land.
Did I give the same answer?
Yeah, you told me about Zohar, so
No, you don't need to apologize. It says, the Mishnah says that one who's bashful doesn't learn, and one who's impatient doesn't teach. So keep on asking. Sometimes it takes multiple times to get in. All right. Let's turn to page 7. Last paragraph on page 7. So that is the introduction to the answer. We started the answer, but we're going to pick it up from here at the bottom of page 7. You don't have to follow along. We're going to explain everything. You could follow along, read in the Hebrew, in English, whatever works for you. Regarding the holiday of Pesach, Passover, it says, and Hashem passed over the entryways of the Jewish homes. Pirish, the miracle of Pesach was that the miracle occurred through a revelation that was of a level of jumping, of skipping over, which I'll explain in a moment, which is not an evolution or a flow from one level to another level, which is, as we just discussed, this is the level of encompassing all worlds, like it says in the Torah, and we'll say in the Haggadah tomorrow night, that Hashem says that I passed over, I am not an angel. So the idea of skipping comes from Song of Songs, King Solomon, and the notion of skipping is that when we walk, we always have one foot on the floor. When we skip, we're kind of lifting our feet off the ground for a moment. An orderly process, the light that fills, follows a walking process, step by step. Everything's orderly. A skipping process bypasses that. It jumps over the normal process. So the Haggadah and the Torah is telling us is that the miracle of Pesach is not an orderly revelation. There's something unique about the revelation that took place on Pesach, on Passover. The miracle of Passover was a jumping revelation. It was a manifestation of this encompassing light, not in an orderly way. By the way, Purim, for example, is extremely orderly. You take out the Megillah, read the story. There's no miracles there, and yet the whole thing is a miracle. That miracle is an orderly miracle. It's like the sun rising and setting every day. We take it for granted. The reason we take it for granted is because it's orderly. It happens consistently every single day. It is a miracle, but it's an orderly miracle. Just parenthetically, which is a greater miracle? A miracle that's within nature or one that breaks nature? What would you say? So that's one perspective. Somebody give me another perspective.
they're both, because one of them is like it's like every 24 hours it happens again and again. That in itself is a miracle. And if it goes outside of nature, it's also a miracle. So I don't know.
And what do you want to say?
It was weird. The other day, I was like, I'm going by and I think I'm stupid, but I was just looking at the moon, like, damn, how's that just stay there every day?
Right.
Who's keeping that up? You know, it's just it blew my mind just to be thinking about it.
Sticky tape.
It's just it's very.
Yeah. What do you want to say?
I mean, almost everything could be a miracle.
It actually, the answer to this question, it's not really a fair question because it's also a matter of perspective. It's very much like these two things we're talking about. The light that fills is actually, the disadvantage is that it's internalized, and it's internalized because it's lower. The disadvantage of the miracles that break nature is that they're not internalized, but they have a powerful impact. So when you experience a miracle that's above nature, you can't help but be wowed and in awe. But how long does that last? The reason why it doesn't last very long is because it's not internalized. So the Jewish people were able to witness the plagues in Egypt. They witnessed the splitting of the sea. They witnessed the revelation at Sinai, and yet they worshipped the golden calf 40 days later. Why? Because these were all miracles that broke nature. Just parenthetically, the idea of breaking nature is on a human level, it's basically saying God can't influence us on an intimate level. He can only force an acknowledgement of him. Now, of course, God can, but that's what a miracle that breaks nature says. Whether you like it or not, you're going to recognize that I'm present. Now, the other side is that the sun rises and sets every single day, and we don't notice it unless we choose to notice, unless we invest ourselves in noticing it. But when we notice it, when we begin to pay attention to the world around us, when we begin to pay attention to our own lives, it's a different type of awe. It's a different type of being wowed. Now we're in a real relationship with God. So the light is not as powerful, but it's much more internal. It's much more real. It's substantive. It has shelf life. Anyway, but back to here. So the miracle of Pesach is a miracle that breaks nature. It jumps. It's God jumping over the normal flow, which is why the holiday is called Pesach, Passover, not just because that's a technical part of the story that God passed over the homes, but because that is the whole story of Passover. The whole miracle of Passover is this revelation of this level of divine light that passes over, that comes that bypasses the normal order of things and reveals itself in a passed over kind of manner.
Oh, wait, that's ironic because the Seder means order.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Why? What's the objective of the Seder? What's the objective of the holiday? What's the objective of any holiday? And do what with it? Not just in a moment, not just for the moment, but to change our lives, to impact us. So we have to take this divine energy. By the way, it's a beautiful idea that there's a Hasidic saying that on an unplowed and unseeded field, nothing grows. Right? If you want something to grow, you got to plow the field, you got to seed it, and then when the rain comes, something's going to grow. Passover is coming. There's going to be this great light that's going to happen. Is something going to happen with that? Or, Passover will pass, literally, and we're going to say, oh, that was it was a good chicken soup, it was a good borscht, whatever, and we'll move on. Or is it going to say, we actually relived the experience, and now we're empowered to be more liberated in the challenges that come our way. That's the objective. So you can't meet jumping revelation with jumping response. You have to allow for it to settle. So the order of the Seder is to internalize that. So it was a very good question. Now, why did the revelation of the Exodus need to be that way? So I believe this was yesterday's Haftarah, right? The Assyrian army. I think this is the reference to that. It says that the Jewish people they had laid siege to the Jewish people, and the Assyrian army was camped, and there were 4 lepers, right, that were camped outside of the walls. Anyway, the prophet said that the cost of wheat and barley was going to be like nothing the next day, and the guardsmen laughed, right? He said, how's that possible? Even if the heavens open up and rain down the wheat and barley, it still wouldn't be such. Anyway, these 4 lepers, they're starving, so they go out to they have no choice because they can't come into the Jewish camp, so they go out to where the Assyrian army is, and nobody's there. And they think maybe there's an ambush, and to keep on going, they realize the Assyrian army left. And they have all this, now suddenly they have all this food that the Assyrian, what happened? So the prophet tells us that an angel came and struck the camp, and they fled in great fright, and they left everything. So the Assyrian army came out with full force. They had all of their possessions there, and now they were gone. So he says that Pesach is different. There was an angel that was sent out to strike the Assyrian army, and same thing with Sisera, the famous general Sisera, who attacked the Jewish people, and the miracle that occurred there with Yael, where she invited him into the tent and she killed him. Anyway, these are the stories are not so critical for right now, but there they were angels. There they had a mission to carry out, which was go and strike those enemies. So in the case of Egypt, there was a different problem. It required a different level of discernment. In the case of the Assyrian army and and Sisera, the angel had an instruction: go and strike. Go strike the army, indiscriminate. Just kill all of them, chase them all away. In Egypt, there was a big challenge. The challenge was that there are two challenges. Number one, there had to be a discernment between who's a Jewish firstborn and a Gentile firstborn. And even within the Gentiles, so the Medrash tells us that anybody, so you could have a child who is a firstborn of his mother, but not of his father. You could have a child who's a firstborn of his father and not of his mother, right? That's understood. So all the firstborns were struck down. But how do you know, right? And there was a lot of illicit relationships going on. So the human eye can't see that. Only God can see that. So in this moment of this plague being striking, there had to be this discernment. As he continues, Va'afilu b'char la'av gam ken kasha leda, who's a firstborn to his father. B'char la'im, the firstborn to his mother, is also difficult to know. Shai mehem shal yuzkenim. Some of them were older already. An angel can't do this discernment. An angel's not empowered at that level. He doesn't put this in parentheses, but it's a parenthetical comment. He says, tam mishum he says that it's brought down in the books that one of the reasons that God himself perpetrated or affected the 10th plague was because an angel can't go into that place of unholiness. In other words, Egypt was a very lowly place, and an angel can't go into that space. So the Alter Rebbe says he doesn't accept that answer. He says that's a difficult answer because we find in the Assyrian army that they were also immoral. They were also lowly people, and yet it was an angel that administered that plague on them. So, and now, if you look at the bottom, we're on the bottom of page. What are we up to? Bottom of page 9. So the in Hebrew it says ach ech sheyiatam. However you want to look at it. In other words, whatever the reason is, at the end of the day, the bottom line is hakavana kol echad. There's the same punchline, which is, in other words, whether you say, even if the answer that the angel going into a place of impurity is a difficult answer, the bottom line is that it needed God to go there in order to discern who was who. And the bottom line is that it was a revelation of Sevav Kalaman. The light that manifested itself in the 10th plague was a light of this encompassing energy. V'zeu ani, this is why it says I. When it says in the Megillah, in the Haggadah, we say ani, it's based on the Torah, that I took you out of Egypt. I struck the Egyptian firstborn. The term I is not used that often in the Torah. We usually refer to one of God's names. And Hashem spoke, Elohim spoke. We find whenever Hashem uses the term I, what does I mean? I means I without any descriptors. In fact, you're not allowed to say Hashem's name. Elohim or Ado and Noi, you're not allowed to say it unless you're in the context of prayer. They have a very high spiritual level. And therefore, we don't just use these words freely. But we can say in the context of God, I is not a holy name. Why? Because it refers to God's essence that transcends any descriptors. It's even beyond the boundaries of the holy and the sanctified.
One of the first words he said at the Mount Sinai.
Anochi. It's also I. There's Anochi, which is an Egyptian word that represents the idea of the merge between the highest and the lowest. But the same principle is there. It's the same idea. God himself is talking to the people. God's essence is talking to the people. So when it says that God says, I affected this plague, we're talking about a divine light that transcends the orderliness, the flow, something that's higher than that. So with all of this, so this all makes sense? Less or more?
I always wondered, why did Hashem himself get off his throne, bypass everybody, like I said last time, and come and do this on the 10th?
You know the answer now?
You just gave it.
You got it.
Yeah, I got it.
Good.
Because he had to distinguish between between you.
Good, good.
Yeah.
And it's also an expression of love, right? When you send a messenger or you send a lower expression even of yourself, not that it's not love, but it's when you yourself get up to go and save your people, that's the great expression of love, that God himself, so to speak, lowered himself to take care of the Jewish people. Specifically, it was necessary. Now, God could have come up with another way of striking them. He could have figured another way to get the people out of Egypt. But this was a specific way because God wanted to create this distinction, and therefore it required God's essence to affect
And in a
it.
way, that's how he has to establish himself to begin what faith makes for people. The meaning, to me, it's, I don't know if I'm saying it.
I understand what you're saying. I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
The very beginning, establishing a relationship of what he means to people. You know, it's not like you send it my cousin, that's our brother, my sister.
Right. Let's get to know each other on an essential level. Yeah.
Established faith, it's almost that serious, but that's an initial part.
But that's also the greatest expression of love. God's saying, I want to be in a relationship with you, not other layers of me. Yeah. Beautiful. Do you have a question?
The other, following along what he said, not to take.
Just make it more clear.
It's good. It's all good.
You know, the first commandment says, I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt.
Right.
It's not even a command, it's a statement. So does that flow into having a personal relationship with people?
Yeah, because creation, because what was the alternative? I'm Hashem, your God, who created the world, right? But that's not what it says in Ten Commandments, because it is about a personal relationship. But again, it's a translating it down. It's the highest, and it's I on an essential level manifesting itself on a personal level. Huh? Yeah. No, and I like how you put that. It's like it's building the relationship from the essence out, right? If you start the relationship on any external level, then that's what you're going to meet. You're going to meet the external. If you show up on an essential level, then the connection is on an essential level, which, by the way, is the nature of the relationship between Jew and God. Already from Abraham's times, right? That's what God basically said. One of the reasons they used the Torah tells us about the covenant of the parts is where they took an animal and they cut it in half, multiple animals. The Torah tells us which animals, and they set them, and then Abraham passed between these parts, and then a pillar of fire passed between it, which represented God passing through. What is this whole concoction of cutting animals in half? So the idea is that it's not a partnership where, you make an investment and I make an investment and we do something together. It's two parts of one whole. And that the two parts of one whole mean that there is a connection there that cannot be severed. It's not based on external factors. Yes, relationships show up in external factors. They show up in what we do for each other and what we don't. Right? It shows up in the 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments. That's where the relationship manifests itself. But the relationship is on an essential level. Our connection is deeper than that. Does this make sense? So now the Alter Rebbe answers the question, middle of page 10. Now we could answer the question why Passover is celebrated on the day of the miracle, which is not the case with Purim and Hanukkah. What happens on holidays, on Jewish holidays? Yom Tov, right? It's a good day. It's a day that there is a divine energy that rests on this earth, rests on the world, on the universe. In order for divine light to rest, there has to be a clean slate. A king doesn't come into a room that's filled with grime and dirt. You got to clean the room up first. We want God to rest in our space. We have to clean it up. I may be jumping the gun here, but I think it's not unlike opening the curtain for the sunlight. So on the holidays, so to speak, as this parallel, the sun is shining. You want the light to come in? you got to make sure there's something to receive it. You got to make sure, and you got to make sure that that which is receiving it is tailored to receive that light. So the holidays is a time where God's going to reveal himself. He's resting here. Are we able to receive it? Well, did we clean up the house? Did we clean up our act? Did we create space for God? If we did, we'll experience it. By the way, a very interesting notion is that people who perhaps didn't experience holidays earlier in life and then become aware of their Jewish connection and choose to experience, suddenly that very same day that a year before was just a regular day, now they're experiencing something. What happened? Is it a figment of their imagination? Or perhaps now that they're in tune, they entered into the experience, or they created space for that experience. What the Alter Rebbe is telling us is that they created space for the experience. Because every year on Passover, that light manifests itself. Perhaps a proof to that is that there are other people that even last year experienced it, right? Because they entered into that experience. But the light is going to manifest itself, and the question is, are we going to be a recipient of it? As the Torah tells us in Devarim, that you have to eliminate the evil from within. We have to get rid of the evil first, and then we can be a recipient for God's light. So v'lachein gabi Purim. So in the case of Purim, mitchila harig b'seneim ayin he'alev shayam aleikim sheiklipa atzuma k'diksiv reishes gayam amalek v'achrisei adi ovid diksiv machay timcha v'aseres b'neham. In the case of Purim, the first thing they needed to do is they needed to get rid of the evil, right? As they did in the story, the Megillah tells us that they killed 75,000 of these Amalekites, right? And then, and fulfilling the Torah's instruction to eliminate the people of Amalek, which epitomize evil. And then after they did that, then after that, they had this day of festivities and joy, giving of gifts of food and so on and so forth, which is the revelation of the divine light. First, they had to get rid of the evil. Then they were able to celebrate. Like by way of an analogy, when a king wants to move into a new house, first you got to clean it up. After you finish the construction project, you got to do your punch list. You got to clean up the sheetrock. You got to have the cleaning crew come in and wipe down all the sawdust and all that stuff. Then once it's all clean, then the king can enter in. You can't celebrate Purim when there's still Amalekites around. You got to get rid of them. Got to wipe them out. Clean the slate. Now we can have time. Now we can party. Now we can celebrate. Now there can be divine light. And that's why in the story of Purim, it took place over 2 days. One day was the day of the victory, getting rid of the evil. And then the next day was the revelation. Page 12. Because there the revelation came from the orderly light. And because it's an orderly light, it has to follow the process. First, there has to be the removal of the negative. And then after the negative is removed, then the light can come in. They can't happen at the same time. It's a process. It's an orderly process. First, getting rid of the negative, and then opening up space for the revelation. Say that again.
About the darkness before light comes. I mean, whole history of Jewish people been like that. From one after the other. Even now, same thing, right?
Yeah.
There's always evil thrown into the world on top of the Jews. And the Shabbat was a state more or less, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I question why that. Did I get too far away? Why is that part of the way it's laid out to you in the world?
Because we're generally dealing with orderly revelation. And orderly revelation requires orderly flow, orderly process. Get rid of the evil, then bring in the good stuff. Right? In an orderly world, these two things can't coexist. Right? We see this in everything in life. Right? You can't build a new beautiful home when the old home is sitting there in shambles. You got to remove it. You got to clean the space. Right? You want to sit down and enjoy a meal. You can't enjoy it if you have yesterday's meal molding on the table. You got to clean it off, clean the room up, set it up, right? Then you can enjoy it.
But it's like God creates a child to be hungry so they enjoy their food. Or, you know what I mean? It's like it's creating this negative first, right? So.
In
other words, it's creating this opening.
if you're asking an existential question, it's a legitimate existential question. The Medrash says that this is the order that God put into creation, right? First there's darkness, then there's light. And we see it at the beginning of the Torah. The Jewish day begins at nightfall. Vahi erev, vahi voker. First there was evening, and then there was day, one day. Darkness comes before light. It's like I mentioned this yesterday in the sermon. It's like life's not fair. Life's tough. That's a reality. I wish it wasn't that way, but it is that way. You want to get to the good stuff, you got to go through the darkness first. That's just the way it is. I wish it wasn't, but that's the way God created. Why did God create it? I don't know. I'll tell you what we know. We know that our experience of goodness, our appreciation of the goodness only comes because we've worked for it, because we worked through the darkness. But why did God set it up that way is an existential question that we don't have an answer for. We know how it works. We know what we experience, but why it is, that's beyond our comprehension. But what we also know is that that's the definition of order, right? What is the definition of order? The definition of order is that things have a relationship with that which is higher than it. And it has to follow a process. Why is it that when you plant a seed in the ground, it rots first before it produces new life? Why is it that in the spring things blossom and in the fall they dry up? And so you're going to tell me the scientific process of what happens. But why is it that this happens in this season and that season? You don't have an answer for it, right? Science can tell us what works and how it works, but why it's that way, science can't tell us. Go ahead. You want to challenge that? It's fair. It's a good setting for that.
Today is a day of listening for me.
Okay.
I have thoughts, but maybe
This is an open forum.
I think in God's reality, everything coexists, fire and water even.
When you say in God's reality, what do you mean?
Well, I believe that's how he created it. We don't see it. Unless we really look deep, we can see sometimes how those opposites coexist.
So from God's perspective, from God's vantage point,
He sees it, he knows how
he's not limited by the orderliness.
No, he's not.
The orderliness is how we experience God, but not how God experiences us.
Right.
That's very correct. When you go to a doctor, right? The miracle of antibiotics. Scribble something, they diagnose you got strep throat. Here's your prescription. You go and you fill it. What do they know? They've proven that this extract, this medication, however they come up with it, when you take it in this series, it'll get rid of the illness. Why? So they're going to tell you, because this is the cells and the things that it affects, and that's how it cures it. But why? Why is it that thing and not just drinking coffee? Like, you get strep throat, you should drink coffee and you get better, right? Why do we have to eat this chazarai, right? They don't know the answer. They just know that that's how it works, and they know the mechanism of it. But that's the definition of orderliness, is that there's a process. And we mentioned this last week, that in Hebrew, the word for nature is teva. Teva also means to sink in. There's a process that God sunk into existence, into the flow of creation. Things work a certain way. That's just the way it is. Why? It's beyond our comprehension. Go ahead.
My only comment on it is, the why I don't know, but it seems like we choose to come to Earth and have this life, and we try to level up. And on that journey of leveling up, you have to encounter these human experiences, which unfortunately have pain and sadness and sickness and all the things. But it seems like the journey is to continue to evolve and through many lives. And so one day we should reach complete light, and then these levels of anger and sadness, whatever, won't affect us. But to answer the why, I'm not sure. But the global why, if that's said correctly, is the journey to the light, I guess, is what I'm thinking.
Okay, good.
But I don't know, that really.
No, 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 that's-
Really connected to.
Don't be bashful. Everybody,
Life journey.
question 20 million times, it's fine.
all correct. But you still haven't answered the why that comes before and is above all of that. Why is it even so in the first place?
Just, yeah, I don't know, I mean, the why is to go to the light, I feel.
But why? Why is that necessary? In other words, if in the teachings of Kabbalah, the soul originates as part of God. God is complete without anything, without the journey.
Because he was bored. He wants to do activity for himself.
Okay, so
Let's create this.
so the Medrash answers the question. I'm going to tell you what the Medrash says. The Medrash says that God desired to have a dwelling place in this world below. Without getting too much into that, what that means is that God wanted to have a relationship with an other. And in order for there to be an other, at least in our perception, God needed to create a world that thinks of itself as something other, right? Which is all of the above. That's navigating the darkness, pushing through, believing in the light, working towards that. That's all entering into this relationship. And when we do that, we bring God into our consciousness. We bring God into the consciousness of the universe. And that's how God feels at home here. But notice the words of the Medrash. The Medrash uses one Hebrew word that's very important, which is that God desired. This is a desire that God had. It's not rational. It's not emotional. It's something transcendent. The Yiddish saying is that you don't ask a question on why someone has a desire. Why do I want this? Because I want it. It's beyond description why I want something. You're going to give a rational, there's many beautiful discourses that discuss this, is that why I want something, you're now going to give me a bunch of rational answers why I want something. But those are rationalizations for the desire. That's not what causes the desire. The desire is higher than that.
Well, one of the pictures I just took in this said that the moment you have desire, you're supposed to, because it was put in there by God. So if you want XYZ thing, you desire XYZ thing, it's because God put it in you to want to that.
So then bring that up to God himself, right? That God's desire itself is beyond comprehension, right? Which brings us back to the question, why? Because God desired, but why? There's no answer to that. That's an existential answer. So whatever the process is, in other words, however the flow is, a gentleman came to meet with me recently, and he has specific reasons he wants to convert to Judaism. And he said, my problem, and they're good reasons. They're not halachically acceptable reasons, but they're good reasons. And he said, but I have a problem is that yeah. He said, I have a problem is that I don't know if I believe in God. So I said to him, I said, what do you believe in? I said, what's your struggle? So he says, he believes in the Big Bang and he believes in this. And I said, that's fine. You can believe in evolution, you can believe in the Big Bang, you can believe in all that stuff. But I want you to ask a question. What caused the Big Bang? What's the day before exactly? And he didn't answer me, but I said, you need to challenge yourself to ask that question. And an honest scientist is going to ask that question. Now, what your answer is going to be is not necessarily God, but there's got to be something. There's something. Call it whatever you want. Let's at least get intellectually honest that there's something that comes before that something, right? Right? What it is, you want to call it God, call it God. You want to call it higher power. You want to call it some other force. We can debate that, right? But let's get to that point. It's the same thing with the why. Whatever reason you're going to give is the mechanism of it. It's the orderly process. It may be challenged, but it's in the orderly process. That's all the normal flow. That's what we call Mamali Kalam. That's the divine light that fills all of existence. What precedes that, what transcends that, and that's Purim. Purim is get rid of the evil. You want to have divine light. You got to clean the room up. You got to clean the house up. Pesach. Aber neste Pesach shaya yidei gilu b'chinas over kolam and sheina b'chinas ischalkos umer l'kolam kechad al ken yachali yishnei dvarim elu b'nei sechad nakol of mitzrayim makas b'cheres v'izgalas hakadosh l'Yisrael she'amru halo. With Passover, however, where there's a revelation of the encompassing light, there it doesn't need to follow that process. It's to your point. that from God's vantage point, and when that vantage point is manifest in our space, in our universe, it doesn't have to follow the rules. So the rules are get rid of the bad, celebrate the good. But when there's a revelation from God's vantage point, when that gets manifest, then you have the elimination of the Egyptian firstborns and redemption of the Jews in the same moment. Discernment and revelation. Because God's not limited to the orderly process. That happens at once. And that's the miracle of Exodus. By the way, when did the miracle actually occur? Who knows?
Midnight.
When is midnight? Cinderella? What time is midnight? 12 what? Midnight is an infinite moment. Because when you have your clock with all of your milliseconds, right? 11:59, 9999999. And it's our limitation that we can't discern the actual moment that goes from 11:59 to 12 o'clock.
That was 59 seconds.
Well, second is itself a limited amount of time, right? A second is a defined, has a measure to it. And we perhaps could define a millisecond. But at a certain point, we don't have the capacity to define that infinite moment where something changes, which is why when Moses came to Pharaoh, he said, Kachatzois halayla, approximately at midnight. He didn't say at midnight, because the Medrash tells us that he was afraid that Pharaoh would challenge the moment. But the Medrash continues, but God, who knows his times, is able to execute in that moment that's beyond time. It's a transcendent moment. It's a transcendent definition between the transference from one day to the next, which is also the same idea of this transcendent light being manifest within the finite reality. It's above time, within time.
There's no time illusion.
Well, I wouldn't call it an illusion. I would call it from a human perspective. In other words, time is a construct that we need, not that God needs.
Right, because it's all like organic time, so.
Exactly.
Multiple needs are happening, but all it's different.
Correct. But we live within the framework of our consciousness, right? So, and what we're trying to do is other than in the orderly times where we're living within our consciousness, we're trying to connect, like on the eve of Passover, with the transcendent consciousness.
But when you said like you can't, of roughly midnight, isn't that true for every hour or every?
Sure.
So are you referring to this moment specifically because it's changing from day to night, or, well, I guess it's more specifically for the specific holiday, but I guess the bigger picture to every moment of every hour is infinite.
Yes, 100%. What's important here, there is something unique about the moment of midnight within the Talmud. We talk about 3 watches of the night, but specifically here, it's about what Moses tells Pharaoh and when God's executing the plague. Like technically, if God said it's going to happen at 11 o'clock, on one level, that's the same point, right? But the point is that it's at this moment between before midnight and after midnight.
So, I mean, what's the significance? I mean, you're splitting hairs about this a second, this not second, other thing. So is this key message is to sustain the Pharaoh sits there and looks at his clock? I mean, what is the significance of him saying it's happening at midnight? What does that mean?
Yeah, what basically he's telling, transcendent. In other words, that this is when Moses first comes to Pharaoh and he says that Hashem sent me to tell you to let the Jewish people go. Pharaoh says, I don't know this God. I don't know this Hashem you're talking about. So God says, oh, you don't know me? I'm going to make sure by the time we finish this story, you're going to know me really good. And therefore, all the miracles are there manifesting both Pharaoh as the individual, but Pharaoh as the idea to break the klippah, to break the the resistance of evil to say, hey, because what is evil? Evil is the absence of light. It's saying, I exist, God doesn't exist. Say, well, by the time the story is done, you're going to recognize that God exists. And that's what happens. So in this moment of transcendence, it's not just the orderly revelation that's taking place, right? It in a certain sense, if you look at the story of Purim and you look at this miracle of this plague of the firstborn, they're two different miracles on two totally different dimensions. And if you're observing them, one of them you're experiencing God as he's within nature. It's waking up in the morning and realizing God restored your soul and that the sun is shining. Hopefully it is. But the other one is like, whoa, where did that come from? What was that? Right? And you can't ignore that. You can't pretend that it didn't happen. There was this discerning that took place and this plague that struck, and the Jews walked out and the Egyptians didn't. And every single Egyptian firstborn got killed. It's like, whoa, that's a revelation that transcends. Pharaoh can't hold back anymore, which is what happens, right? The actual reality is that Pharaoh actually lets the people go at that point. He can't resist anymore. And in fact, in the verses, he says, you're right. I recognize God. This is the hand of God, and so on. All right, to be continued. You have a question?
Just in a one sentence, I'm trying to get to the answer where there's one that permeates, the other one that transmits. I get the transmission part, like you clean up your solar power or whatever, so the light, absorb it. What about the other way? Like, how do you clean yourself up so Hashem comes into, like,
How do you prepare to receive such a revelation is your question.
correct?
Yes?
Yes.
The answer is that you don't meet the revelation at its revealed state. In other words, you can't do, if I make an investment in your company, I expect a return. And the return is going to be a reasonable return based on my investment because it's a reasonable exchange, right? There's an exchange there. It's a strategic alliance. It's a partnership. When you want something that's beyond comprehension, you can only do your part, which is to do your best to prepare. But that's all that's asked of us. And that's all we can do. And what happens beyond that is beyond any effort that we put in. But it's kind of like, maybe think of it like this. You know that the revelation is going to take place at that location, and you know that there's nothing you can do to actually be a recipient for that revelation except to show up. So that's it. You just got to show up. The holiday is going to do what it's going to do. There's going to be this revelation tomorrow night. Passover, there's going to be this tremendous revelation. The question is, are you going to be there or not? Not whether you're going to do anything to receive it. Are you going to be there? If you're there, it'll enter. If you're not there, it won't. When I say there, I don't mean necessarily physically there, but wherever there is, you'll be. I know you'll be there. But wherever there is, are you going to be there to receive it? When you're talking about the orderly stuff, you actually are going to get what you put in. There's a balanced exchange there. So if you invest, you'll get a return. Here, all you got to do is show up.